the last point, but the last point is in relation with the one just before, is this question of the history of the future. I think it's a very nice question. No? I would think you would like it, Martin.
I love it.
The history of the future. One day Martin told me in a conference, the guy giving the conference said, the next future. And that was, what is the next future? So the history of the future, what is the question? It's simple. Huh? It's to say that the way we think about the future changed through history. So it's possible to make the history of the way we think about the future. Right? Okay? Like you would make the history of art. Right? You make the history of the way we think or conceives of the future. It also means if we do this history of the future that we should also be able to position in this history of the future the very fact that we are asking the question today and not yesterday, because it's not an old question. Right? Luhmann writes, it's the first sentence of a paper, he writes, the history of the future doesn't reach back very far. It's a new question. And I will just try to deal with three questions in relation to the point just before. It's how did people think about the future in pre-modernity? So what was the pre-modern future? Or what was the future like in pre-modern times? And then how did society think about the future in early modernity with the nation state? And then how do we think about the future today? And I will try to link this with education problems. Because the way we think about the future, of course, education is always about, it's about the future, right? It's about preparing people, so we have to have an idea of what the future is in order to decide how to and what to learn or teach. Pre-modern times, I think what is very important here, in pre-modernity, people thought of the future as something that was not dependent upon them. It was God, it was nature, it was written, it was given, but the future was not understood as a result of the present. It was in the hands of an outside of society, right? Entities outside society. That's how the future was conceived. So people may have been worried, or they may even have been scared about the future, you know. But whatever the future was going to be, was attributed to external forces. Right? So there wasn't much you could do to protect yourself from the future, respect religious principle, maybe pray or whatever. But the future was not in your hands. It was, right? Yeah.
Sorry, so would someone say that this is true for the ruling class as well? Because there's a tension, isn't there, in this idea of kind of what will be, and the future is destiny. But also for the ruling class, they work quite hard to make the future be what they want it to be in order that they can then make the claim that it's destiny. So would Leo make a distinction then between ordinary people and the ruling class in terms of the sense of the future?
I'm not sure, because I mean, to the extent that they would think of themselves, even the ruling class, as being the ruling class because of nature or God's will, or not because of their merit. Yeah.
I think, for example, maybe we wouldn't think of this as criticism of modern, but I'm just thinking of in the English Civil War, for example, both sides would make claims about it being God's will and predetermined, but they would work very hard for that future to make God's will, to prove that they were in the right, I suppose. There's a kind of tension.
Yeah, there might have been like prophecies of, doing everything that we can to make happen was what was meant to happen according to external. Yeah. I don't know. I think it's a good question, but yeah.
A little post-colonial perspective. The most Aboriginal societies in Australia have no concept of future, none at all. It is they have a visual symbol which means infinity as a continuous present, and the cosmology is not one that operates in the way that Paul describes. So it's a very interesting, challenging kind of perspective, and they are the oldest living civilization now. So
yeah, I think in this situation of pre-modernity, it was also, I don't think there was a notion that the future would be different. That there was not a notion of a difference between the past and the future. It was more of a stable thing, but nevertheless with dangers. I mean, one could die, or one could be, threatened, or bad things could happen, right? But these were not in one's hands. Right?
In Aboriginal society, they are in the hands of the people, as well as if they don't act cosmologically, if they don't act in the way the land requires. So
you have to do what's right. Yeah, that's true. That's true. So it's more complex than what I say. You have to do what's right, of course. And here as well, you have to do what's right. And possibly, if you do something that's wrong, bad things could happen. But it's not the same thing I think, as really the modern notion of the idea that the future will be the product of today's decisions and that it will be different, or could be different. But I won't speak about pre-modernity very much longer. I have a citation here by Jean Clam, who is someone who worked with Luhmann. It's in French. I think it's a very good sentence. I will translate it just after, but he says, la société est devenue, aux confins de la modernité, son seul et unique point de référence. So basically it simply means, with the turn to modernity, society has become its own and unique point of reference. So it can no longer attribute its own order or whatever happens in the future to external points of reference. Everything that happens in society must be attributed to society. So that changes everything. That's because it opens possibilities. It's as long as things could be attributed to something external, well, they were as they were. But if we start to think that everything depends upon us, then why do this and not that? Right? Contingency, right? Possibilities. It means that it becomes possible for society or people to observe themselves as decision makers that can make a difference. Now we have to distinguish again between the future of early modernity and the future, our future, the future as we see it today. I think in both cases, with the break from pre-modernity, the future comes to be seen as a matter of decisions and projects. So the very idea of policy making that will change the future emerges. The future is no longer attributed to the external world, but it's attributed to society. In early modernity, the nation state, right, is in control. And to make it very quick, I think the future there is seen as the realization, the building of the nation. That is the project. That is the future. It's making the nation happen. In this context, and with this future in mind, education is central. Right? How else? How else can you make the nation happen? How else can you include everyone, make sure that everyone is part of the nation, speaks the language, has got the knowledge, has got the culture. Right? So education, but education in the traditional sense of the term, the school form, teachers, curriculum, teaching, right? That's a key means for making the future of early modernity happen. The function, I think this is important, the function of the school form. So the school form it's a French concept, la forme scolaire, we say in French. But it means, well, to have organizations with dedicated space, time, role difference between teachers and pupils, and classroom interaction. Right? So the function of the forme scolaire, of the school form, is to make otherwise very improbable interaction between the nation and the people happen. You see the point? I mean, the notion that there should be interaction and between the people and the nation is a very, very improbable thing if you don't have schools. So that schools are meant, the function of the school is to make this interaction happen. Without school, it's very improbable where, how, when. It would not happen, right? So you needed schools to have a nation. I think that's a very well-known point. So teaching is very important. Having a curriculum, having a role difference between the teachers and the pupils, and the teachers know what the pupils will need in the future. Okay, I will speed up a bit and go to late modernity. Our future. So Luhmann's point here is to say that with the globalization of all functional systems and no statehood anymore above, trying or having the illusion of coordinating everything, the world has become ungovernable. That's the point I made in the beginning. It doesn't mean that it becomes chaotic. It just means that it evolves in non-chaotic ways. It's not chaotic, but it's not the result of a decision. Right? So that means that the future then becomes unpredictable. It becomes full of uncertainties. It becomes full of risks. We don't know what is going to happen to us today. And increasingly, we know that we don't know what the future will be. Right? The future has become uncertain. We don't know. We don't know what it will be like in a few years, politically, economically, we don't know. Huh? And of course, we have never known. Huh? No one has ever known the future. But what's happening today is that we know that we don't know. We increasingly know that we don't know. The future becomes problematized as uncertain. So at the center of everything in today's future is the difference between the past and the future. We know that it will be different, or at least we think. The future will be different. We don't know what it will be. We can take guess, of course, but we don't know exactly what it will be. We know that it will be different, or we think that it will be different. And of course, when the future comes to be seen as uncertain and unknown, this has implications for education and for governance, or for governing. Education becomes, at once, it becomes a solution and a problem. I mean, the future is uncertain, so education, we have to prepare for the future. Education is a solution. But at the same time, we don't know. I mean, how do you prepare someone for a situation about which the only thing you know is that you don't know what they will be? It's a problem. Education is a solution, it's a problem. We don't know. We have to look for, we don't know what we should do. How do you know what to teach? How do you prepare people for the future when the only thing you know is precisely that you don't know what are the situations that they will have to deal with? As long as we thought we knew what the future would be like, modernity, early modernity, as long as we knew, then the issue of the curriculum, what to teach, how to teach, was not that much of a big deal. Right? The future was an improved version of the past, and so we had to pick the best knowledge of and transmit it. But once the future becomes unknown, then we have got a problem. And of course, education has reacted to this problem already. We developed the notion of competence, right? Transferable competence, so that's transferable, that's competence capable of being used in yet unknown situations. Right? Of course, learning instead of teaching becomes a solution. I'm not saying I'm in favor or against, but I'm saying learning and learning to learn. If you manage to have people learn how to learn, but then what else can you do in the face of when you face uncertainty? That's the best you can do. Then they will maybe be able to learn when they meet unknown situations and solve problems. Right? So that means that then you don't really have a curriculum anymore in the sense of a body of knowledge that you transmit, or culture, or la culture générale, we say in French. You rather have these problem-solving ideas, competence, transferable competences, learning how to learn, and all these come to be seen as solutions when you face an uncertain future. So in other words, and I will finish, Paulo, sorry, when the future becomes uncertain, education tends to move from teaching to learning. And that's also when you move from early modernity to late modernity, from teaching to learning. I will maybe just say a last word about governing and governing education, because when the future becomes full of risk, how do you govern? I mean, how do you make decisions? It's also a problem. It's when you have a clear idea, it's very schematic. But when you have an idea of the future, the nation, making the nation happen, the problem of making decision and governing is not the same as when what you know is that there are risks in the future. And so one consequences of this for governing is that you need more knowledge. Right? You need knowledge to know, to get to have an idea of, So there is a request for knowledge as a reaction to uncertainty. So you need experts, you need people from different instances, and you tend to move from governing to governance. Also as a reaction to uncertainty in the future. You need knowledge. That also means, and Paulo, I'm going to just to finish, but it also means when you don't know what to do, and you can try this actually with an auditorium or whatever. You give an instruction that is not understandable, right? And you say, no, do it. You do it. What people do, they look at others. What do others do? So this is one thing that we do when we don't know what we should do. We look at what others do. So we go and we see and we compare, and we go to Finland and we go to Korea and we try to see what they do there and how well they do, and do we do better than them, or and maybe we should copy, borrow ideas. We also look at ourselves. Are we doing ourselves today compared to ourselves yesterday? Are we doing better or worse? And then you produce knowledge. Huh? When you're looking at what others do and yourself and reflecting on yourself, you produce more and more knowledge, but it doesn't solve the problem. Because that's the problem with knowledge. It actually does not limit the number of possibilities and tell you what you should do. It expands. It makes it even worse. Because then you have more choices, more possibilities, things that you thought that you took for granted, you no longer take them for granted. We used to, this is the way of learning how to read, and there is just one way. But once you realize that there are other ways, so you have more knowledge about how to learn to read, you have the problem of deciding then, and you're not sure. So we come, and this is my conclusion, we come to a situation, a kind of paradoxical situation where we have more and more and more knowledge about more and more things, and at the same time we have less and less certainty about what we should do. And so we look for even more knowledge to decide, and we visit other people and we copy, and so we are, and this process is like you don't see the end of this, right? Because it's always the future, and the fact that the future is unknown is, in a way, it's not an obstacle. It's a resource, because we make more and more education, more and more policy because of this. So it's not an obstacle, it's a resource. But it's an infinite resource, because we never reach the future. Luhmann is a good paper, it's a future cannot begin. We never reach the future, so it's always, So we don't know how to, and we are not in control of this. This idea of Luhmann, we have lost control over society, but it's still happening and evolving in a certain way. Okay. This is a table that try to summarize what I've said, but we'll leave it because I think we are out of time. I don't know. Or should I comment still on this? Well, it's a summary, I try to distinguish again pre-modernity, early modernity, and late modernity, and the different questions that I've spoken about: the form of society, the future, how we think of the future, policy, the switch from governing to governance, and then education, the switch from teaching to learning once we move from the nation-state early modernity towards a global society with an uncertain future, with facing risks. Okay, it's an attempt, right? It's a schematic attempt. I should apologize to Luhmann for having, I think, maybe simplified and went very quickly in a very complex theory. But, well, still, I think this is a place to have this kind of discussion about sociology. Thank you.